Hello everyone. Today we're taking a look at the min-min light phenomenon of outback Australia, a mystery that, while it has been the subject of immense scrutiny, remains unsolved. So, kick back and relax as I regale you with the legend of the min-min light, and as always, thank you very much for your company. Imagine, if you will, you're cruising along a long, straight stretch of highway. The landscape is sparse and the night air is balmy coming through the open window. There's a light a ways ahead of you, a motorbike maybe. As you follow it along for some time, it suddenly and inexplicably darts off the road and across the boundless plains at an inexplicable speed. You have just had an encounter with the min-min light. Although fictitious, that story is how a sighting could go. And this phenomena does change from sighting to sighting, so I want to kind of outline some of the common characteristics, if you will, just so as we go through some stories, you've got an idea of what's going on and something to base your understanding in. So here's what I've been able to come up with based on the stories and descriptions that I have been able to find. Although very similar to some other phenomena around the world, such as the Marfa lights of Texas, to be a min-min light sighting, it should be around the Shire of Boulia, which is in Queensland. The light appears as a glowing ball of light very similar to the headlights of a car, and it can range in brightness from being very faint to dazzlingly radiant. And it has a whole spectrum of different colours, but across accounts it tends to appear as a bright white light. The light tends to hover anywhere from 3 to 50 feet off of the ground when witnesses were asked to gauge where it was sitting in their encounter, as well as they described that it moved around with a very keen sense of purpose. Quite a few people reported that it kept a perfect pace from them, as in it would move away as they got closer, and as they moved away, it would come closer. Some people reported that the light seemed to move towards them, and this was either gradually over time and it took them a while to notice that it was happening, or it would be incredibly quick and move with this immense speed in erratic patterns. A couple of accounts also stated that the light would split into 2 or more instances, each with their own behaviour patterns, and all of the sightings seemed to happen at night or those very deep kind of twilight hours. Right now you can see a map that outlines a couple of key points of reference. Boulia is the home of that sign that you saw at the start of this video, and Min-min is a old settlement of yesteryear, which is now a ghost town. Keeping in mind these two places, as well as the fact that we don't have it confirmed what these lights are, or a whole lot of concrete information around them, I'm taking everything from data, stories, and just testimonies as a real kind of gospel in this video. So take everything with a grain of salt, please. However, I can share with you our first story of the min-min light. The year is 1918. Min-min has long since lost any life that it once had, and a stockman pulls into Boulia and has the following tale to share. About 10 o'clock this evening, I was riding to Boulia and passed close to the Min-min graveyard. The night was somewhat cloudy. All of a sudden, I saw a strange glow right in the middle of the cemetery. It got bigger until it was the size of a large watermelon. I couldn't believe my eyes as it was hovering over the graveyard. I broke into a cold sweat as it started coming towards me. It was too much for my nerves. I dug the spurs into my horse and headed for Boulia as fast as I could go. Every time I looked back, the light seemed to be following me. It only disappeared just out of Boulia. I do have a couple of issues with this story, namely the fact that a ghost orb materialized in the middle of a cemetery, in the middle of a defunct township, and it immediately tried to pick a fight with the closest person, which, while an immensely funny visual, isn't the point. Not to mention the idea that he rode his horse at top speed without rest nor break for almost, 100 kilometers, makes the mysterious light somehow the least scientifically intriguing part of that entire story. Nonetheless, I don't want to discount the idea that this event may well have taken place. Stranger things have happened. I think that in some level it's a cultural game of telephone where this story has some seeds of truth to it, but it has been embellished to the point that the horse's stamina is now something out of an epic. However, I do think I have found one of the earliest written mentions of the lights, which comes from James T. Horton's 1839 book, 6 Months in South Australia. Now, speaking in semantics, I can't call this a Min light sighting because it didn't happen in the generally agreed area, keeping in mind that map that I showed you. But it's culturally and, historically significant, as well as you see, it shares a lot of the same characteristics. We were not long in hobbling our horses in the rich feed by the water's edge, and preparing our usual large fire and supper of wild ducks and pork, and the never-failing quart pot of tea. Then, smoking our last cigar, we're just turning in at 9 o'clock, tired and sleepy, when our well-accustomed companion, to his great surprise, saw a fire a little way off, and concluding it must be either bushrangers or travellers like ourselves, quietly ordered our men to saddle a couple of horses, and he and the servant would ride off and see who the strangers were. The rider was recommended not to go to sleep, but to smoke another cigar, as they would be back directly. But it was about 3 hours before they returned, and had seen neither tire, bushrangers, nor travellers. They rode boldly up to the spot where the fire, as they thought, was burning, but it was as far off as when they started. In short, it turned out to be an igneous fatuus, or a jack-o'-lantern, and kept them upwards of an hour trotting on in the vain pursuit, till by some sudden flickering and paleness it confirmed them in its unsubstantial nature, and they returned rather mortified to bed, while the neighbouring fire continued in its old and original appearance till we had all turned in. I absolutely love in that little account how quickly they just accept that the light was some kind of supernatural, mysterious entity, and they're just like, hey, those jack-o'-lanterns, huh? All of this begs the question, seeing as how we have an account that is almost identical in its nature, bar the location, of course, but it goes back almost 200 years now. So, what the hell are these lights, and why are they appearing? Everyone that sees these lights seems to have some kind of explanation of their own, and there is no shortage of theories. A few of the main theories include things like ball lightning or some kind of bioluminescent wildlife, namely a large bird. Now, I'm not entirely sure which of these options between the sentient lightning or the unfathomably fast-moving glowing bird is more terrifying, nor which poses a greater risk to humanity at large. Jokes aside, ball lightning is incredibly rare, and even in the most optimal conditions for it to appear, it's incredibly rare. And it doesn't really act like how the Min lights are reported to act, and I don't think I should have to explain that there is, as of yet, no evidence for a enormous glowing bird that prowls the outback. Grounded much more in the geography of the region is the theory that the rocks around the area are giving off some kind of electrical discharge, which to me seems like a reach, but physics was also really never my forte. I don't really have a horse in the race of solving this whole mystery, but I do like the theory put forward by Dr. John Pettigrew, who hypothesized that the lights are a kind of fata morgana, a phenomena wherein my incredibly limited kind of understanding for dummies is where cold and warm layers of air interact in a way that causes light to refract and bend, which causes objects to appear distorted and to the point of sometimes appearing like they're floating. He suggested that this process could be taking place in the outback, and owing to the uniquely desolate, flat landscape, all of the lights that people were reporting could be things like campfires or the headlights of a car, which could be an incredibly far distance away, but were being distorted to appear floating or far closer to the observer. To test this theory, he drove 10 kilometers out when the conditions were perfect, and he positioned the headlights of his car just below a slight rise so that it was out of line of sight from where he started. And 6 observers that he had brought with him all reported that they saw a light very similar to the Min light float up into view from above that horizon. A very common theme with the lights seems to be that all sightings happen when it's dark out. So I'm curious if they performed the experiment at night, if the outcome would be changed at all. And although this kind of hypothesis has never been proven per se, Pettigrew's work remains the most fleshed out by far, and he was probably on the money. However, in the interest of a little bit of kind of scientific documentation, I have some data that is sourced from Maureen Kozicka's book, The Mystery of the Min Min Light, and I should also mention the vast majority of data, like accounts of sightings and everything, come from her book as well as Pettigrew's papers that he published. Once again, all of this data was sourced from just asking people about their experiences, so it's not super concrete in that regard. But a few statistics that I thought were interesting was that 50% of sightings were reported to be in the winter, 30% were in summer, and the remaining 20% people either couldn't remember or fell into autumn or spring. Next up, the vast majority of instances that the data was collected on lasted for about 10 to 30 minutes. And then I've got the other graph somewhere, which shows when, like in which decade, the sightings took place. I'm particularly suspicious of this 50s section on it because the 50s is when that kind of alien craze and all those kind of curiosities really took off, which I don't know if I'm reaching here. But Maureen also mentions that the data was probably skewed by age brackets and the age of who they were asking. Now, I was sitting back and I was really thinking, really having a head scratch at how can I introduce the most pretentious, nonsensical ramblings into a video about some weird lights. And then it hit me. I think the Min Min lights are particularly special because they are unsolved. Like, you can just go out and, I was going to for this video until I realized just how far away and expensive Boulia is to get to. It's like 2,500 kilometers from where I am. But if you wanted to, you could go out and you could see these lights. You can go and really engross yourself in the magic and mystery of something that's unsolved, hasn't been documented well. I think though whether the lights are, supernatural, they're a weird distortion in the sky, or, maybe they are a great glowing bird that is prowling the desert. These lights are so special because it's tied to the region and it gives people stories to share, which in turn fosters some very real human connection and discussion about it. I had to really go digging for all of the stories that are featured in this video, and I cannot fathom how many must be left unwritten, existing only as spoken from one person to another. And I think as much as I kind of poked fun at it, there is something nice in the way that James Horden just accepted the lights for what they were and was content in that conclusion. I am absolutely rambling right now and I'm aware of that, but I think my point boils down to how, as someone who has never seen the lights, although I'd like to and I think it would be, pretty cool, there is something so captivating about the unknown, as well as the fact that you've got this mystery that's just out there that spans hundreds of years, and it has these flow-on effects where people are enamored by this wonderfully weird phenomenon just in the sky, where they go out and they pursue it in different ways, such as writing down different people's experiences of it. You've got people who try to solve it, try to figure out the mechanics behind it. And, you've got people like me who are talking to you about it right now. However, in keeping with that theme of the wonder of storytelling, if you'd let me, I'd like to share with you a couple last stories of the lights, legend or otherwise, from Kozicka's book. There's a story often told about a woman who used to live at the old Min Min pub. There were no electric lights. She used to walk about all over the place at night with a lantern, Anyhow, they found her in her room with her throat cut. The grave where they buried her is down on the edge of the prickly bush. They reckon they've seen the light come up out of the grave, and that was where it was first seen to appear. It was seen very often, apparently, and that is where the name of the Min Min came from. And when you see the Min Min light, there she is, still searching. Just kind of interjecting here, I really like that one because it's so campfire ghost story-esque to it. A man I know always used to ridicule the light and told me about a year after that he was driving around his property one night and ran into the light down in a creek, and he thought, hello, this is not good. They've camped in the creek. Probably potty dodgers, he said. I drove in as far as I could, then set off to walk to see what was going on, and it just moved away from me. I realised it was the Min Min light, and I headed for the Hamilton Hotel and drank some rum. We were pushing and grading fence lines on Collada at the time, and had 2 separate camps some 25 miles apart. That afternoon, I went out on the motorbike to pick up Charlie, my dozer driver, who was pushing a new line north of the lakes. It took me till after 8 p.m. before I came across him, and then we doubled back on the bike some 5 miles to the Toyota, where I left him to return to his camp at Back Creek. I then headed off on the bike to my camp at Halfway Swamp. While crossing the plain approximately 9:45 p.m, I noticed a reddish light similar to a large star shining through a smoky haze appear to the right of me, about a mile or so away. It seemed to rise from the ground up to a height of 40 or 50 feet and then slowly descend. I pulled up for a while to watch it. It began pulsating about 6 to 8 feet off the ground, from bright to dull and back again, once or twice seeming to fade right away, but then reappear. It was putting the wind up me by then, so I headed for my camp still some 6 miles away. It seemed to be keeping with me, and I had to get through a gate. Well, it was the quickest gate I ever opened, and I headed for the camp without looking back. Next morning, Charlie came down to my camp, and he told me, without any knowledge of what I'd seen, about a similar sighting in his camp at 11 p.m. the same night. He woke up suddenly from what he did not know, but while sitting on the edge of his bunk having a smoke, a light similar to the one I'd seen appeared and descended to a few feet above the wall of the dam about 100 yards away from his camp. He got up to have a closer look, but it faded and disappeared. And finally, a real question from the think tank that I know we've all been asking. Why did it go out when I threw a stick at it? I do sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this video, in some capacity. This has been a little bit of a passive interest of mine for some time now, and information on it is very scarce to come by. Like the book in particular I had to order online, which once again a massive thank you and acknowledgement to both Maureen Kozicka and Dr. John Pettigrew. Their work really constitutes the basis for this whole video. All of their work as well as my other sources are in the description below. I would highly recommend going and checking that out because it's very well written and you are going to come away with it with a much better understanding than I can impart onto you. If you've got any queries, questions about anything in particular or a, suggestion for another topic that I should look into, feel free to leave a comment or you can email me. And finally, to just kind of address the fact that this video is so wildly different to all of the other content I've ever made, my heart wasn't really in the gaming stuff anymore. Those videos aren't gone, they are just retired to a unlisted playlist. And I massively appreciate anyone that supported that content in, any shape or form. This is going to be the kind of stuff I'm making going forward. So if you stick around, welcome aboard. However, that is well and truly enough out of me. So as always, thank you very much for watching.